Will you join me in prayer? Beloved God, may these ancient words, your words, fall on fresh and fertile soil, and may we grow because of it. Amen. You know, when you sit back and you think about it, we did an extraordinary thing this past year. And by we, I mean the whole world. Faced with a worldwide pandemic, we shut down as much as possible. We stayed inside as much as possible in order to slow the spread, in order to protect the vulnerable. The speed at which we changed the way we work and worship and learn and exchange goods and connect was extraordinary. Yes, enormous loads fell on frontline workers and parents of young children, and we learned just who is an essential worker, didn't we, and how much they aren't paid. One of the many tragedies of how politicized the pandemic became in our country is that we lost sight of what an amazing thing we did together. Arabella Lumley wrote on Tiny Buddha, and she said, "We had been living in a way that neither serves humans nor the natural world, and yet we continued on this path, seemingly powerless to stop what we were doing. It's as if we were all part of this machine that kept on chugging along, but no one could find the stop button. Well, that stop button arrived, and it's not like anything we could have ever imagined." Do you remember this quote that was popular around a year or so ago? "And the people stayed home and read books and listened and rested and exercised and made art and played games and learned new ways of being and were still and listened more deeply. Some meditated, some prayed, some danced. Some met their shadows, and the people began to think differently." Of course, the pandemic wasn't the only story of the year with its racial reckonings and wildfires, election, ice storm, and attempted insurrection, and through it all we learned that friends and family and neighbors and relationships are primary. Material goods, not so much. Our health is gold, so are essential workers. We can make big and vital changes faster than we ever imagined. And I believe that we're going to look back on this time as a watershed moment, a dividing point from which things will never be the same. Look at how the Babylonian captivity changed Jewish history and culture. It was a horrible experience for them by any reckoning, but look what emerged. The Israelites were initially lost without their temple, their center of identity, their center of worship, their center of being, and then they adapted. The current Hebrew alphabet was adopted during this period. They gathered the stories of the first 5 books of the Bible, the Torah. They wrote them down, they edited them, and they began to regard them as their central sacred stories. Scribes and sages emerged as leaders over and against priests. The change was so life-altering, we were taught in seminary to consider them Israelites prior to the exile and Jews after. Think of it, they left as Israelites, they returned as the Jewish people. And even after they returned to the land, there were always Jews living outside of Israel. Another 600 years later, when they again were exiled from Israel, they knew how to be a people with an identity and a portable faith. We can do so much more than we think we can. It's 86 degrees in the sanctuary right now, or the last time I checked, and I looked a few minutes ago and it's 96 degrees outside at 11 in the morning in June in Beaverton, Oregon. And those sounds you hear are the happy sounds of waters being opened as we try to hydrate. I have one right here. It's 96 degrees out at 11 o'clock in the morning in Oregon, in Western Oregon, where summer isn't even supposed to start until July 5th. Climate change? Impossible to say because these high temperatures are only data points. But they are data points in a pattern of increasing climate instability, in a pattern of hotter hots, colder colds, drier dries, wetter wets. That instability was exactly what was predicted when I studied climate change during my first sabbatical. I can't believe it was 24 years ago we were talking about this. Sitting in a class taught by the chair of Harvard's Earth and Planetary Sciences Department. He and 1,400 other atmospheric scientists anticipated not a gradual warming of the climate, but an increasing instability, like we've been seeing. The class was mostly made up of undergrads who were studying environmental science and public policy, and they would go on to influential careers in government and think tanks and banking and insurance. We met around this beautiful, long, polished teak conference table, and I will never forget the day the professor went around the table one by one and asked us each to respond to this question. He asked, if you could stop climate change, if you could solve the problem at the cost of 3% of the GDP, the gross domestic product, would you do it? Every one of those students, every one of them in my memory anyway, shook their head and said, 3%, no, we can't do it. It has been hard for me to be optimistic since that moment. Now, I don't have the economic chops to parse out what COVID has done to the GDP, but I'll bet it dropped it a whole lot more than 3%. When we had to shut down, we shut down. I'm sure there were conference tables full of people shaking their heads and saying, we can't do this, but we did it regardless of the cost. And that, to me, is astonishing. And for the first time in a very long time, that gives me great hope about climate change. And isn't it interesting that so many of the things we're taking away from the pandemic are the things that will make the planet more livable too? Slowing down the hamster wheel on which so many of us live, staying home, enjoying family, centering friends and extended family, socializing with neighbors, making music, playing games, low-impact activities, almost all of them. And look, these are the very same things Jesus encourages us to do for the good of our souls. It's a win-win-win. Yes, he uses hyperbole and exaggeration to make a point, but the point is the point nonetheless. Listen again to his teaching as I read from Eugene Peterson's version in the Message. Jesus says to us, you can't worship two gods at once. Loving one God, you'll end up hating the other. Adoration of one feeds contempt for the other. You can't worship God and money both. If you decide for God, living a life of God worship, it follows that you don't fuss about what's on the table at meal times or whether the clothes in your closet are in fashion. There's far more to life than the food you put in your stomach, more to your outer appearance than the clothes you hang on your body. Look at the birds, free and unfettered, not tied down to a job description, careless, carefree in the care of God. And you count far more to God than the birds. Has anyone, by fussing in front of the mirror, ever gotten taller by as much of an inch? All this time and money wasted on fashion, do you think it makes that much difference? Instead of looking at the fashions, walk out into the fields and look at the flowers. Look at the roses, look at the iris, look at the chrysanthemums, really look. They neither primp or shop, but have you ever seen color and design quite like it? The 10 best humans in the country look shabby alongside them. If God gives such attention to the appearance of the flowers, most of which are never seen, don't you think God will attend to you, take pride in you, do the very best for you? What I'm trying to do here is get you to relax, to not be so preoccupied with getting, so you can respond to God's giving. People who don't know God and the way God works fuss over these things. But you know both God and you know how God works. Steep your life in God reality, God initiative, God provisions. Don't worry about missing out. You'll find all your everyday human concerns will be met. Give your entire attention to what God is doing right now and don't get worked up about what may or may not happen tomorrow. God will help you deal with whatever hard things come up when the time comes. Hard to improve on those words. I just had to read them again. What a time it is to be alive. To see our once-in-a-lifetime lessons from the last year converge with the unprecedented needs of our planet and to converge with the timeless needs of our souls. We can slow down. We can simplify our own and our collective lives. We can do it, and it will lead us to a world of good. We can make the changes we need through the grace and love of God, who has not forgotten us, who holds us in his great heart, who has tattooed our names in the palms of her hands. Stay cool, stay safe, stay hopeful. Amen? Amen.